Okay, in the last video we talked about bonds, and now we're moving on to stocks, which you probably have a general idea about how these work. Uh, you've probably heard about them on the news, and your parents maybe talk about them. A bond is a promise. It's an IOU. You're loaning money, essentially. It's just a loan with less transaction costs, and maybe easier to buy and sell. That's about it. A stock is a hope. All right, a bond is a promise. A stock is a hope. You're hoping that the company that you're buying stock in is going to do better in the future. A bond, you're probably going to get your money back no matter what. A stock is, you're crossing your fingers. Some companies don't sell stock. They're called private companies. A lot of companies start private and then they become public companies, right? So, a private company, the owner of that company, let's say, I start my own, I don't know, cupcake store or something like that. I own my own cupcake store. I get total claim on the profit. So if the cupcake store that I make and selling cupcakes, it does really well and I'm making a lot of money, I get all of that money. That's mine solely. I'm a private company. Okay, tax, whatever. Okay, we're simplifying models here. But I have total right to all of that. I'm not selling stock. I'm not a publicly owned company, right? I'm privately owned. It's just owned by me. I might sell bonds. Let's say I want to open another location or something. I could possibly sell bonds on the bond market, or I could go get a business loan. I have other, options and other financial options available to me. I'm just not choosing to go public. I'm not big enough, and I don't want to go through all that. And going public has its, risks involved with it as well too. But anyways, so some companies are private. The owner has total claim. That is incredibly high risk. Remember, high risk, high reward. You get all of the profit. If you work hard and your company does well, woo, you get all the profit. But that's also high risk because if the company goes under, then you've lost everything, right? You didn't just lose a fraction of your money; you've lost all of the money you invested into it. So that's where private can run into some problems. But let's say, you decide to go public. So you're going public, and that's usually how you're going to hear people in the news talk about it. Facebook went public. I know you guys don't care about Facebook, but they own Instagram and WhatsApp and all that other stuff too. So, they're just called Facebook. So when, Facebook decided to go public, they created what's called an IPO, an initial public offering, where they say, we're going to sell shares in our company. We're going to sell this much of our company. And that's basically what a share is a fraction of the company, right? A little chunk of the company, and they're going to sell them out to people. And an IPO says that our original offer, this is how much we think each share is going to be worth. And then the market tells them whether they were right or wrong. When Facebook first did their initial public offering, they sold, I don't remember what it was, like $30-something, like $38 a share. And it went down fast. Like people were buying and selling them on the market, and they were like, yeah, that's not worth $38. So, there's going to get complicated there. But anyway, so you do an IPO, an initial public offering, where they start to sell off part ownership of the company. Now, if you're selling off part ownership of the company, then you're also selling off part of the profit to other people. You are not owning that company anymore. You don't own it all anymore. When you're a private company, if you're the only owner, you own 100% of that company and 100% of the profits. But if you sell off half of the company through shares, right? You sell off, a bunch of different shares, half of them, you've sold off half of your company. You've sold off half of the profit of your company as well too. Why would anybody do this? The main reason is it spreads out risk. It spreads out risk. A lot of people will buy stocks rather than own an entire company outright, because then you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. Joint stock companies have been around for hundreds of years. Most likely the first joint stock companies, like at least the first idea of it, really started in the Indian Ocean trade, where Muslim merchants were doing trade across the Indian Ocean. They realized pretty quickly that, hey, if I own one ship, I can make a lot of money. Like if I own one ship crossing the Indian Ocean, I put spices, I put raw materials on there, I can make a lot of money off of it. But if that ship sinks, I've lost everything, right? I've lost my entire investment, I've lost the ship and, all the crew members, whatever. I've lost all of my money. But what if instead of me owning one ship outright, which is very expensive and very high risk, what if I own just a fraction of a fleet of ships? Like what if there was a company that owned 100 ships and I just own, a part of that company and a part of the profits, right? I don't own everything. I'm spreading out my risk. Now I'm not going to make as much money. I'm not going to make as much money as if I owned a ship outright, but I'm also not going to lose as much if catastrophe hits. So it spreads out the risk, not one person carrying it all anymore. It also raises funds. If you sell stocks, so let's say you're selling off half of your company, essentially, that's a way of getting money. So you are selling stocks, people buy the stocks, and then they sell well. Now, if the company is doing well, So let's say Facebook is seen as a popular company and people think that they're going to be making more money in the future. Their stock value will increase. And if they go to sell more stocks, they will be able to get more money for that stock. Um, so, anyways, it helps them raise their funds and raise money if the stocks are doing well. Companies will oftentimes have stocks and bonds as well too. So it's not like a one or the other thing. A lot of times they'll do both. Here's an example. I'm pretty sure this is accurate. I looked it up about a month or two ago. Microsoft has about 8 billion stock shares, which means that they've split up their company, at least the parts that they're selling, into 8 billion chunks. If you own one share, you have the right to 1/8 billionth of Microsoft and 1/8 billionth of Microsoft's profits. Um, Microsoft does profit sharing. They do dividends. We'll talk more about that in a second. Um, I don't think owning one share is going to be much to live off of, but when you're talking about 1/8 billionth of their company, but that is an idea of how you can make money off of stocks. So you can purchase a bit of Microsoft, and if you own that 1/8 billionth part of it, you own part of Microsoft. You are part of the company. You're part of the team in a weird way. People will buy and sell stocks then off their hopes and beliefs about the future, which lowers and raises the values of stocks. So let's say I buy a share of Microsoft today, and I was happy with that purchase, but then tomorrow I need liquidity, I need cash, and Microsoft's doing better than they were yesterday. They announced there's some new program or whatever coming out, and they're super high hopes for it, and the market's like, oh my god, Microsoft's doing great right now. We got to invest, buy Microsoft. The value of their stock will increase. Say I bought it for, I don't know, $100. Now it's $150. I will be able to sell that stock for $150, and I made a profit off of it. Somebody else buys that at $150 because they think next year it'll be worth $200, and they think it's going to be a good investment for them. That's how stocks basically work. So our beliefs about the future will change the value of stocks. Whereas bonds are set by a bond rating agency, and that's what they are. Stocks are a hope, right? Some people will say it's kind of gambling, and in a way it sort of is. You're gambling on the stock market. Yes, you can do a lot of research, and yes, you can say, oh, this is what's most likely to happen. You never know. It is a little bit of divination. You have to take a guess and try to hope for the best and plan for the future. All right, stocks versus bonds. When a company sells stock, they are breaking their company into equal parts that can be then bought and sold. This is called equity, equal parts equity, right? So, and we'll talk more about like what equity means and how you may have heard before with like equity loans and stuff. We'll talk about that in a second here. But anyway, so they break it up into equal chunks. So let's say there's 8 billion stocks. They've broken up into 8 billion chunks, right? 8 billion little pieces. That can be then bought and sold. If you own one of these pieces, you have right to the profits of the company. Some companies will do profit sharing. They will give out dividends. Not all do. But you have access. You have a right to that company. If you own over half of the stock, over half of the equity in a company, you own that company basically. You have half of the company at least. You have a right to have a lot of say in that company. There's all sorts of laws and hostile takeover stuff and rules about that stuff. It gets really complicated really fast and really beyond this class. Like if you purchase a certain amount of stock, it's like 5% in a day, you have to claim it and it gets publicly released and all this stuff because we're trying to avoid hostile takeovers, yada yada. It gets really complicated really fast. But anyway, just know it right now, like if you own more stock, you own more of the company. And if the company does well, you also do well, right? The opposite is also true. If you own more stock and the company tanks, then you lose everything. Think like 1920s, right? And the stock market collapses. So stocks are kind of wishy-washy. They can go up and down. However, when a company gets bonds, they're essentially getting mini bank loans from thousands of investors. They're interest-bearing assets, and these are liabilities that need to be paid, right? However, bonds don't have any access to the profit, and you're not owning the company. Bonds are separate. If you own stock, you're basically owning part of that company, and the more stock you own, the more of that company you own. I mean, it's possible takeovers where you can buy enough stock that you basically can own the company outright and fire everybody and do whatever you want. Like you can just basically take over the company. Bonds don't work like that. If you own a bond, you're basically just owning a loan that you gave to that company. So make sure you understand the difference between stocks and bonds. Stocks have a potential to make buku bucks. Like if the company comes out of nowhere, like Microsoft. If you bought Microsoft stock right when they became public, or Apple stock when they became public, and you held on to that for decades, you're probably a multi-millionaire, if not billionaire by now, because of stocks. Bonds, you're probably not going to be millionaire, billionaire, but one for the other. All right, last slide for this video before it gets too long. Equity and liability in assets. No good place to really put this in, but I want to make sure we kind of talk about this and um, make sure we have an understanding of how this stuff works. Because a lot of times you're going to hear the word equity, or do you have equity in your house, or equity loans. I want to make sure we understand what this means. So we said equity was like chunks of your company and how much of it you own. So instead of company, though, let's think about houses. Let's move over to your house. And this is something your parents might be able to help you with too, if you can talk to them about, mortgages and stuff. So let's say mom and dad buy a house for $100,000. So a house is selling for $100,000, and they have to put down $20,000, right? Which is pretty good. They put down 20% interest. That's pretty good. Or 20% down payment. That's pretty good. So a house sells for $100,000. Mom and dad put down $20K. Cool. Another way to look at this is that they have $20,000 in equity now. So they own $20,000. The house is worth $100,000. They own $20,000 because they put cash down, right? So they have $20,000 in equity now of that $100,000. So the house is worth this much. Think company if you want to sub that out. But this is worth this much. Your parents own $20,000 of that, all right? That other $80,000 is a liability. Mom and dad have a liability to the bank. The bank has an asset, right? They have $80,000 as an asset, where the bank's like, hey, I've got $80,000 and I'm going to get interest payments on their mortgage, right? So the bank's happy. The bank has an asset. Your parents have a liability. They're probably not happy about this $80,000. But your parents also have $20,000 in equity in the house. All right, hopefully this is making sense. If you need to, pause the video, think it over a little bit. House is worth $100,000. Mom and dad actually own $20,000 of it. Bank owns the other $80,000, right? Mom and dad have a liability. Bank has an asset. All right, now let's think about this first question. What would happen if they sold the house today? Who would get that money? Who would get what money? So let's say they sold the house immediately after buying it. The value of the house hasn't changed. It's still a $100,000 house. It was $100,000 yesterday. It's $100,000 today. But something happened. Mom and dad need to sell it. And I know this is super simplified. There's no taxes. There's no fees. There's no all this other garbage that comes when you want to buy a house. But let's say they sell it immediately for $100,000. Well, who gets what money? Well, okay. Mom and dad already own $20,000 worth of equity. Right? They sell the house for $100,000. They still owed $80,000 as a liability. So when they sell that house, the bank gets the first $80,000. Right? So the bank gets their money back. Now, mom and dad get what's left. They get $20,000 back. And it kind of wipes the slate clean in a way. Now, if they had gone a couple of months before selling the house, right, and they had paid interest on this, and the numbers are all different, but we're just saying like one day to another, they would get their $20,000 back. That equity, basically the part that they owned of the house, they would get that back, and the bank would get the other $80,000. 80 plus 20 is $100,000. So scot-free. What if the value of the house increased to $150,000? Okay, so mom and dad bought a house for $100,000. They put down 20. They got a loan basically for $80,000 left over. That liability they owe there. But now the house is worth $150,000, not $100,000 anymore. They sell the house for $150,000. Okay, well, they still have to pay back that $80,000 that they still owed. The mortgage was set by this number, not by this new number. The bank can't predict this. The bank can't control this, right? So the bank, when they gave the original loan, they were looking at $100,000. So the bank has an asset, and your parents have a liability worth $80,000. So mom and dad pay that $80,000 out of the $150,000. So they pay that off, and the bank's done. The bank's happy. The bank got their money back. I mean, they would have wanted interest, in the long run over 30 years. But whatever, that's how it works out. Mom and dad sell the house. They give the bank back $80,000. How much do they have left over? They have $70,000. Of course, the first 20 of it is their equity, what they already owned of the house, the original amount. But then, because the value went up to 100, 250, now it's worth a lot more money, right? So now they can get that extra $50,000, and that's your parents' money in this case. That's extra assets. This is why people flip houses. When the market's good and people are willing to buy low and sell high. This is how equity and liabilities. This is how this all plays out in an actual real world example. By the way, this is similar to stocks and companies and purchasing things. This is just a real world example that may be a little more familiar to you guys. Um, if you could do the same thing with like stocks and owning different financial assets, essentially, and playing it out the same way. So, anywho, now the house is worth more money. Mom and dad get more money. I did this. Literally, I did this. I bought a house shortly after the housing market collapsed. It was a foreclosed home. I did some work on it and I sold it for a profit. And it was a house I lived in for 5 years as well as I did it. It worked out in the long run. For me. Now, a lot of people, unfortunately, their houses don't go up to $150,000. They went down. If you bought a house for $100,000, then it was only sold for $50,000. You still have that $80,000 liability. That's when you're in trouble. That's when you're underwater. All right, let's give another scenario because you might hear this in your life, and so this is a real world example here. What if mom and dad took out an equity loan? Let's go back to the $100,000. Here with the $20,000 down. What if mom and dad took out an equity loan of $5,000 to cover some expenses? They want to remodel, they want to buy some appliances, whatever, furniture. How much of their house do they own? Well, if you bought a house for $100,000, put down 20, you owned $20,000 worth of that $100,000 house. You had $20,000 in equity. But you got an equity loan. You may see these on commercials. People advertise for them. Basically, what you're doing is getting a loan off of this $20,000 that you owe of the house. So the bank says, yeah, I'll give you $5,000. Now you only own $15,000 with your house, and you'll be paying interest. You're basically creating another asset for the bank, another liability for yourself. You'll be paying interest on that equity line of credit. You can get yourself into trouble with this, but basically you're taking loans off of your asset here, this $20,000, taking loans off your equity. You're no longer the sole owner of that equity anymore if you're taking loans off of this. So, and yeah, I know this seems weird and confusing, but this is how the financial system actually works. People are always willing to take your money, depending on how risk tolerant you are. All right, and that's pretty much it for like stocks and bonds, and a little bit of equity and liability. We're going to be using these terms a lot more, especially when we look at T-charts and stuff later on. So hold on. If this stuff seems confusing, just keep working with it. Sleep on it. It'll be easier in a little while. Next thing we're going to talk about is bank deposits.